Who knows the name Lorne Michaels? Lorne Michaels. Lorne Michaels has been the producer of Saturday Night Live since 1975, I believe. And if you're familiar with Saturday Night Live, the history of Saturday Night Live is kind of broken up into eras according to the major stars, the players, they call them, that were on Saturday Night Live. So you have, the first round, you have Chevy Chase, Bill Murray, right? Gilda Radner, you have that first class. And then there's this era where like they're there, and then it seems like a bunch of them leave, and then a bunch of new stars come, and the show tanks in ratings. And everybody, the critics predict the demise of Saturday Night Live. It's been happening since the late 70s. And then a new crop comes in, and then they get really popular. And the ratings are really up, and we're like, wow, Saturday Night Live's amazing. And then those people leave, and the ratings tank, and the critics predict their demise. And then a new crop of people, and Lorne Michaels, since 1975, has been going through these eras where he gets to a certain point, and all of a sudden critics pile onto him. He has all kinds of opportunities to be discouraged. He has all kinds of opportunities to question if he's doing the right thing, or if it's going to work, if what he's doing is going to be a success. And then time and time again, he just brings in a whole new crop of people who become massive movie stars. And then he just does it all again. He's like a star factory. So here's just a small list, not complete by any means, of the people Lorne Michaels has discovered. Chevy Chase, Bill Murray, Eddie Murphy, Dana Carvey, Phil Hartman, Mike Myers, Chris Farley, David Spade, Adam Sandler, Will Ferrell, Jimmy Fallon, Kristen Wiig, and others were all discovered by Lorne Michaels. Now, Jimmy Fallon, of course, is the new host of The Tonight Show. Lorne Michaels is now the producer of The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. Seth Meyers, who is a writer on Saturday Night Live, is now taking over Jimmy's old show. Lorne Michaels is the producer of Seth Meyers' show now, Late Night on NBC. Conan O'Brien was a writer on Saturday Night Live. And so you've got this guy who, many times critics predicted his demise. And now he's like the king of late night behind the scenes. The guy has literally taken over late night TV practically with the stars that he discovered and that he kind of released to be the celebrities that they are. Lorne Michaels, to me, is a great model of what it looks like to stand. We're going to read in a passage this morning in Ephesians 6, the author telling these Christians, these first followers of Jesus in Ephesus, to be strong and stand. He doesn't even say march forward. That might be too much. At certain points in life, we find ourselves where we're not sure we can even march forward. The William Wallace battle cry is just not going to do it for us. The author just says, be strong and stand. Just keep doing what you're doing. To me, I think Lorne Michaels is an excellent example of what it looks like to stand. This is the last week of our series. We're all in this together, Ephesians, and we've been studying this letter to these Christians who lived in Ephesus, which is the capital city, what is now southwest Turkey. And it was a small minority of Christians who were scared. They were being persecuted by the Roman Empire. They were hurting financially. They were shut out of the business world. They were socially ostracized. They were feeling loneliness. They had all kinds of emotional turmoil, family challenges. You know what financial stress alone can do to a family? Just multiply that with what these followers of Jesus were going through in Ephesus. And the author writes this short letter, this 6-chapter letter to these people to encourage them, to say to them, you're not alone. You're not all just flailing out there in whatever is challenging you and whatever difficulty you're facing, but you're a part of a group. The main theme of Ephesus is oneness, togetherness. We're not alone in this. We're together in this. And the author wraps up his letter with this huge motivational speech that kind of reads like something that a general would tell the troops in the ancient world. But it's not, we're going to go out and we're going to conquer and we're going to do all these things. It's just be strong and stand. Stand there. And what he's really saying is don't retreat. That's the point. Don't give up. Don't retreat. You're tempted to turn back and give up whatever it is you're facing in life. You're tempted to turn back and say, I don't know if I can do this. Maybe I'm just going backwards. Maybe I take a step forward and I take 2 steps back. But the author is saying, just stand there. Be strong and stand. And so I know how that strikes you this morning. I know there are things that people tell pastors, and I know there are things that people don't tell pastors. And some people are more open books than others. And so I know some of the struggles that some of you face. I also know that there are struggles that all of us face that, you just don't tell the pastor what's going on in that particular area. I'm aware of that. There are things that we don't really tell anybody. There are battles that some of us are fighting that are all in our heads because nobody else knows. And so it's almost like we have these different voices in our heads. Maybe I'll do this. Oh, maybe I'll do that. Maybe that's how I should have reacted. No, maybe that's how I feel about this person. It's like the battle in our heads because we're not telling other people about it. I don't know what you're facing today. Maybe it's loneliness. Maybe you're looking for somebody and it just hasn't worked out at this point yet. Maybe you're facing career challenges. Maybe you're trying to balance career and family time. Maybe you're at the place in life where you're starting to ask questions like, how much time do I give to family, but I want to be successful, and I know if I'm successful, I'll help my family, but I don't know how, quality time versus maybe you're going through that right now. Maybe it's a certain temptation. Maybe you're facing some temptation. Maybe it's an addiction. Maybe it's something, it almost seems like you're compelled, like there's a compulsive power behind something you're struggling with, and you're just not sure what to do. You don't know if you even stand and be strong in that situation. Maybe it is financial anxiety. Maybe it's your spiritual life. Maybe you feel like, I'm just not really growing. I haven't really gotten anywhere. I feel like, I'm not sure what I believe about all this stuff. Questions and doubts are in the way anyway, and I just don't know what to do with those. And maybe it's a religious battle. Maybe it's hard for you to get up on a Sunday morning and go to a church service because you're skeptical about organized religion. And you see what's going on in our culture, and you don't want to be one of those people. And so it's difficult for you. You want to have a spiritual connection to Jesus, but you're not sure you want to be in this Christian group. And you don't know if you can really stand and be strong in your spiritual life, in your faith life. Maybe it is inner turmoil, an emotional battle you're facing. You're hurting in some way. Maybe it's been around for a long time, and you're not sure if you can get through it. Whatever that is for you, we're going to read a passage in a moment that can speak very powerfully to you and I. It has to me this week. I've been rocked this week by this passage. And the same thing can happen to you if you'll be open to it. If you'll be open that maybe God could say to you, you can stand strong. You can be strong and stand, even if you don't think you can. If you're open to what I want to do in your life. So let's read it. Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 20. It'll be on the screen. Ephesians 6, 10 through 20. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. We're going to talk about the devil in a minute. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Wow. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, to stand. Stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Verse 18. And pray, count the number of times he says pray. And pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Pray also for me. Are you getting the hint? Pray also for me, that whenever I speak, words may be given me so that I will fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains. Pray that I may declare it fearlessly, as I should. Let's pray quickly. God, thank you for an amazing passage that falls onto our ears and onto our hearts in many different ways this morning. We all are fighting a battle. We are all engaged in some kind of warfare, not necessarily with flesh and blood people, but with circumstances, pain from the past, conflict, uncertainty, anxiety, loneliness, doubts. And God, if we were honest, if we could all huddle up in a circle and we all told the truth about what it is we're going through right now, some of us would say things like, you know what, I'm not sure that I can make it through this. Some of us would be like, you know, life's pretty good right now. And then as more people talked around the circle, things would start to come up in their minds and hearts and be like, I guess I do need to deal with that. There are things that we've put on the back burner. God, I pray that you would actually bring some of those things to the front burner today, where you can address them, where you can heal them. God, as we spend our time together today, I pray that you would speak to us in amazingly powerful ways through your Spirit, through your word. As you know, the author says in verse 17, that you would embolden us, give us strength, give us confidence that we can stand and be strong, whatever it is that we're fighting. God, heal us and speak to us in our deepest point of need today. In Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. When we read that passage, can't you just hear the Eye of the Tiger playing in the background? I see like all 13 Rocky movies flash before my eyes. William Wallace firing up the troops. I mean, motivational speeches. Yeah, generals firing up the troops. It's hard not to read something like that and feel psyched up. Like, yeah, that's inspiring no matter who you are, where you are in life. Language like that is inspiring. And again, these people in Ephesus were scared. They were being persecuted. The worship of Artemis was the dominant religion in the culture. And the way it works was religion in the government and the economy were all tied in together. And if they didn't participate in the worship of Artemis, as people who wanted to follow Jesus, they were shut out. It's foreign to us. The truth of the matter is Christianity is the dominant religion in America. It still is. And so it kind of puts us in an odd place to even imagine that, even though some of us feel like a minority even within Christianity. But this group of people was shut out of the financial and social and emotional life of their city. People looked at them as outsiders and as suspect. And the author writes this amazing inspirational passage to them. And the author wants to give them a vision of life that is different than the one that they're getting in their culture. And so the author uses language like this. He says, our battle is not against flesh and blood. It's against principalities and powers and rulers of forces. And he uses the word the devil. We can withstand the devil's schemes. And that's language that while that people in that culture believed in spirits easily and the devil, they didn't quite see their life circumstances like that. They saw the natural things that were going on in their lives. Well, I said this and then this happened and I worship Jesus and that's out of these areas. But the author wants to open their eyes to a different kind of reality. And we're in a church where we say questions and doubts welcome, correct? Does anybody ever have questions about the devil and about Satan? I've been asked over the years, do you think Satan is a literal being or is Satan the personification of evil? Like what do we do with this? If we want to ask questions honestly about what we believe, we know we live in a post-scientific revolution world where our five senses are what we trust, what we can taste and touch and hear and see and smell. We trust our five senses to teach us about reality. And the author of Ephesians does this amazing thing where he goes beyond our five senses to paint a picture of what is going on. There's no doubt that the writers of the New Testament believed in a literal being called Satan or the devil. They believed Satan was a fallen angel who controlled a host of lesser angelic beings called demons. And they saw these forces behind the persecution in the Roman Empire. They saw these forces behind what was going on. Like you could pull back the curtain to one of these drapes, and you could see behind it. They would see these forces behind the natural events of their day. Obviously, when we read the New Testament in the 21st century developed world, we have questions about that, correct? And so we're going to deal with those questions for a few minutes, and then we're going to look at what we can learn from this passage. So every week we've been trying to take a nugget away from what can we learn about interpreting the Bible in the 21st century. I don't have a new one for you. We're gonna just kind of repeat the list here in a second. But if you're keeping notes, we want to take a thoughtful approach to what you believe about the devil and evil. Take a thoughtful approach. So this week, I do a lot of my sermon prep in coffee shops around town. I don't have an office. We're not to that place yet in the life of our church to rent office space, so I make like a Starbucks my office. A lot of Starbucks are cramped. The tables are close together. You know what I mean? Like you can see what the other person's doing next to you. Not that you would ever look, but you can see what the person. And so this week, I'm on my computer, and I have this, this pretty large computer anyway that we use for graphics. And so I'm like Googling Satan. And so, when you Google something, like images will come up, like Google Images. And so I'm looking at images of like horned creatures, nasty, bloody things. This lady next to me this week's enjoying her coffee and reading the paper, like she does probably every morning at Starbucks. And so she looks over, she sees me reading about Satanism and Lucifer and demons and that kind of stuff. She's like, I moved to the Southeast Valley to get away from things like this. Like, that wasn't funny at all. It's fine. I'm used to that by this point. 51 weeks in, I'm used to that. So she's looking over at my computer, just like giving me glances. I'm like, how do you explain? I'm actually giving a sermon about Satan this week, and it's just going to get more awkward. But when we don't necessarily enjoy talking about Satan and evil and demons and that kind of thing, right? You don't want people to enjoy it, at least. Maybe some people enjoy it too much, but we don't necessarily enjoy that. But the author is trying to teach us something very powerful about life. And it's a part of our faith, but we want to take a thoughtful approach to what we believe about the devil and evil. When it comes to this topic, I find, like so many other topics and Christianity in America, there are people who take two different extremes. One extreme is that you have people who blame everything on the devil, and everything's spiritual warfare all the time. I don't know if you know people like this in your world. You might not. And there's a demon behind everything, and it's just kind of this sci-fi world of evil and demons. And then on the other extreme, you have people who don't take evil seriously. It's just not something they think about. And unfortunately, that can lead to consequences that they didn't see coming. So first, we want to talk about people who maybe give too much attention to the devil. If you're keeping notes, it would be important to know the history of Satan. Isn't this a great topic? It's very pleasant. Use this in a conversation. Consider the history of Satan. Use that in a conversation this week. I wonder, for people who focus so much that everything's about the devil, I wonder what it would do for them to consider the history of Satan. On week 1, we said one of the nuggets for interpreting the Bible is mind the gap. There's an enormous cultural difference between our culture and the culture of the New Testament. In the culture of the New Testament, evil spirits were accepted as existing next to us all the time. Nobody ever questioned that. This was right at home in the Greco-Roman world. Again, people question that much more so in our society. On week 2 of this series, we said that the Bible is a library. The Bible is not one book, it's a collection of books, and the Bible does not speak uniformly on every topic it addresses. You're definitely going to see that in a second. The Bible does not speak uniformly on the topic of Satan or the devil or demons or evil. There's an enormous difference between what the Old Testament teaches about Satan and what the New Testament teaches about Satan. In the Old Testament, there's a being who appears in only 3 out of the 39 books of the Old Testament. And that being is called Ha-Satan. Ha in Hebrew is it's the Satan. Ha-Satan. In other words, Satan is not a proper name in the Old Testament. It's a being, but it's not the name of a person. In Hebrew, Satan means adversary or accuser. And in the book of Job, for example, which may be the oldest book in the Bible, the Satan is a member of what appears to be like God's heavenly court. This is literature written 3,000 years ago on the other side of the planet. And much like a king in Mesopotamia, God had a heavenly court, beings who would advise God. The Satan is one of those beings. The Satan shows up in God's heavenly court. The Satan is kind of like the prosecuting attorney and brings accusations against Job. Job only follows you because you bless him. He only follows you because your life's easy, or his life's easy, because you've given him so much. And that's what sets off this book of Job. It's a fascinating story if you've never read it. But the Satan is a member of God's divine court. Well, something happened in Jewish history about 150 years or 200 years before Jesus that changed the meaning of Ha-Satan. Some events happened with the Jewish people being taken into captivity by the Babylonians, then the Persians. And then Alexander the Great conquered. It's just a story of wars. And then his kingdom was divided up, and there was a horrible, evil, maniacal, Hitler-like dictator named Antiochus Epiphanes. And the Jewish people faced evil that they had never seen before. And because of, well, I'll put it this way, during that same time, there was a connection with Persian religion, because they were conquered by the Persians before they were conquered by the Greeks. And in Persian religion, there was dualism, that God is not the only power at work in the world. So they encountered that. And then they faced the evil of Antiochus Epiphanes about 150 years before Jesus was born. And about that same time, we start seeing what we would now recognize as this being with the proper name of Satan. It wasn't that way in the Old Testament. This happens in the intertestamental period between the Old Testament and the New Testament. That's also the same time that there rose up the belief in what we now are familiar with as hell and demons. Greek daimon used to mean a good spirit hundreds of years before this, but eventually became known as an evil spirit, a demon. So now, after I say that, skeptics would just say, okay, well, that's the development of religion. It's just, one culture bumps up against the next, and it morphs, and there you go. A believer might say something like, well, perhaps God was revealing more about reality. Perhaps God intended for these concepts to kind of cross-pollinate, and for this idea of Satan as a personal being to emerge. It just depends on where the person's coming from. But that is the history of Satan. That the proper name, Satan, this being that we're so familiar with in our culture that so many people believe in and people blame things on the devil, this belief in this being arose out of very, very difficult times that people were having in life, dealing with things that were very discouraging to them, dealing with violence and evil and injustice. And as they tried to make sense of that, they started to think, maybe God's not the only power at work in the world. Because that had been their view previously. Maybe there is another power at work in the world. Maybe there is a cause. Maybe there is a deeper cause behind things like 9/11. Just for example, racism and injustice in the world and the evil impulse in people. Maybe there's a bigger cause behind that. So I think it's just good information, but at the same time, for those who see Satan everywhere, Satan's doing everything, I think it's just good information to know that there is some question here about, there is some latitude to think as we see, how the idea of Satan come to be throughout history. And again, the believer would say, well, God intended it to be that way. God revealed what evil is like over time. My concerns are more pastoral concerns about people. I've seen the belief in Satan misused. I've heard of kids who have autism being prayed over, and people are casting the devil away from them. Can you imagine being a kid? And they're rebuking Satan, like the spirit of autism. Many of you didn't grow up in churches like this. Some of us are just flat out scarred from churches like this, where, it's not Satan, guys, it's autism. You know what I mean? And there are times when people go through things, and this belief actually makes it harder for them. Right? I have friends who lost a child. And believe it or not, there are actually people who kind of made them feel like, maybe you didn't pray enough. Maybe you didn't tithe enough. And that allowed the devil to come in. It's just crazy stuff that you hear. And people who are already hurting get hurt worse because of people who just see Satan in everything. So that's one extreme. The other extreme, I think, is for people who don't take evil seriously. There are guys I know who would laugh at the concept of Satan and then go cheat on their wives. There are people who would just mock the idea of evil in the world and then just make ethical choices that are just terrible. They cause all kinds of evil and brokenness. There are people who would downplay any kind of evil in the world and just laugh at anybody who would talk about Satan or evil, but then they would make choices that would hurt their children. And there are people who would just act in ways that violate other people's rights, but they would laugh at the concept of Satan. There are people who create evil precisely because they don't believe in it. There are people who start off, and they're people of integrity, and they have good intentions. And then maybe at work they get into some things where, the boss kind of pressures them to cut corners here, and there's an unethical decision here, and there's a little cheating here, a little lying here. And pretty soon, that person can find themselves in a place in life they never imagined they would be in. If you've ever had the experience of looking in the mirror, maybe one of those defining moments of life and thinking, I didn't expect to see this person 10 years ago. There are times, maybe friends of mine who've struggled with addiction and are people who have just kind of been swept away in pressures when they look in the mirror and they, I'm not who I want to be. And sometimes we can get to that place because we didn't take evil and temptation seriously. And so maybe that's another extreme. For people who would have questions and doubts about Satan and evil and demons and all this kind of thing, but they would just brush it all aside and end up doing evil and creating evil precisely because they don't believe in it. So, it's good to know, I think, information about the history of Satan when we talk about discouragement and the things that make you doubt whether you can stand strong. All right, moving on. If you're keeping notes, we're going to get to what this passage meant to the Ephesians and what it means to us now. You have the power to choose how you respond to the evil things you face in life. You have the power to choose how you will respond to whatever discouraging thing you thought of when I asked the question earlier. What is it that you're not sure you can make it through? What is it that you've tried to deal with before and it hasn't quite worked out? There are lots of things in life that we don't have control over, but you do have the power to choose how you will respond to those things. 2 years ago, my family and I moved to Chandler from Ohio. And I drove in first. I drove our car just, packed with, everything we had that we couldn't fit in the pod. And my wife and son flew out about a week later. And so I rolled into town at night. It was about 9 o'clock at night, and stayed with a friend of mine who's a part of the church. And so I was just rolling into this new city for the first time where we're going to go start this church. People had sent us off and prayed for us and donated, and it drove, whatever it is, a 30-some hour drive from the frozen tundra of Ohio to the valley, and got to my friend's place. And I was hungry, and immediately, let's go out to eat. And so we walked across the street to this restaurant, and we just had a good time and enjoyed a meal together. And this is the start of a new adventure. This is what everybody's been sending us off about and praying for, and it's the start of a new chapter in our lives. I immediately got food poisoning. I went home to his place. Again, I had been in Phoenix for 2 hours. Went home and started feeling like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be bad. I'm gonna share you all of the details, but so you will have an idea of what occurred. I vomited 18 times. I laid in my friend's bed, getting up for most of those, and I was sicker than I've ever been in my life. I was actually sick for 3 days. I didn't go to the hospital. We're like at 4 a.m., sick as I've ever been in my life. I didn't go to the hospital because my wife and I had junk health insurance. And I'm like, we're starting a new church. I don't want a $2,000 ER bill. So I was the sickest I've ever been in my life. And it was the very first thing that happened to me when I rolled into town to start this new church. The very first thing that happened. Now, Ryan, are you saying Satan gave you food poisoning? Did demons sneak into the restaurant, moo ha 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 ha, and sprinkle some bacteria And no, I don't, I don't necessarily blame everything on Satan. At the same time, I did think of this passage. Because while I don't know if Satan gave me food poisoning, I do know that a restaurant did. And I know it was the first thing that happened to me when I rolled into town to start a new church. And that definitely had the power to discourage me. Are you following me? And I'm trying to move and take care of all these things, and I'm just laid out. The very first thing, sicker than I've ever been in my life. I thought of this passage, and here's why. Here's what this passage means to me. There are things that happen in your life and mine that are definitely not in our control. Many of us like to live under the illusion that we control far more things in life than we actually do. And of course, we're not going to admit that. But there are things that happen to us on a daily basis that we have no control over. The followers of Jesus in Ephesus had no control over how they were being treated by the Roman Empire and the worshipers of Artemis. There are same things that happen to you. You have no control over. But you do. Here's what the author is saying. You do have control over how you respond to those things. Because discouragement comes into our lives when we believe the lie, when we believe the deception. And Satan really in the New Testament is known as a deceiver. When we believe the deception that I don't have any control over how I respond to this. We can be right and say, I don't have any control over what happened to me. But then we can take that too far and believe the lie that I don't have control over how I respond. And the author is saying to these frightened, discouraged followers of Jesus in Ephesus, you actually do. You have the God-given power to choose how you will respond to the things that happen to you that are outside of your control. As I was counting to 18, I kept telling myself that this too shall pass. This is a minor thing. We're going to be. This isn't an omen for the future. Things are going to be good. Ryan, you have the ability, the God-given power to choose how you respond to the things that happen to you that are outside of your control. So very, very quickly, we're going to take a look at the armor of God. This is how the author says you can respond to the things that happen to you that are outside of your control. He mentions the belt of truth. There are lots of sermons you could Google and you could listen to pastors take this illustration way too far and talk about why it's the belt and why it's here and not the helmet and all this kind of stuff. And that's fine. You can do that. But I think it's just important to list these things. The belt of truth. He says, put on the belt of truth. I have a picture of a Roman centurion. This is what he's thinking of. This is a Roman soldier. He says, put on the belt of truth. I don't really think, to be honest, it doesn't matter like what part of clothing we're talking about, whether, like I said, whether it's the belt or the helmet or something. What matters is the truth and the righteousness that he lists here. Truth is a view of life that represents reality. Truth is how human life works best. And so if you're discouraged because you've been trying to love somebody back who's hurting you, and I don't mean abuse, but I mean you're not retaliating, you're not causing the cycle of violence, and that's the cycle of retaliation at work, and you feel like work's really tough for you because you're not striking back. Well, the truth tells you that human life works better when you don't strike back. You follow me? That's what we're talking about, truth. Do you follow me? I'm losing you. I know I'm losing you. There's been a lot of information. I know I'm losing you. Do you follow me? Truth means this is how life works. So I'm just going to keep doing these right things, and I'm not going to be discouraged. I'm going to put on the belt of truth. I'm just going to keep on doing what I know works best for human life. Righteousness is closely connected to that, the breastplate of righteousness. Righteousness in the Bible means to do what is right. To do what is right by everybody. It's closely connected to justice. Doing what is fair. Not just going by the world system, but treating people fairly. Some of you have a heart for righteousness. And you're discouraged because you see so many things in the world that are so wrong, and you feel that in your own life. There are times, this isn't a good pastor word, there are times when we all get screwed over. And people treat us in ways that are not righteous. It's not just. It's not fair. It's not right. And that can discourage us You can take that home and affect your family with that. You can take that to your friends when that happens. The author says, protect your heart, put on the breastplate of righteousness, that you just do what's right, you do what's just, you do what's fair, even if it's not done to you. You continue to do those things. And you can choose how you're going to respond to the discouraging things that happen to you. Feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. This, shoes, the Roman centurion's footwear here. The gospel of peace. The gospel is the good news about Jesus, that Jesus came to give sight to the blind and freedom to the captives, and good news to the poor and release to the oppressed. Peace is wholeness. And there was this thing in Rome called the Roman peace, the Pax Romana, where Caesar said, I'm going to keep the peace. And by that, he meant, if you cause trouble, I'll crucify you. That was his definition of peace. The writer here is saying, you stand for the peace of Jesus. You live your life in such a way, no matter what discouraging thing happens to you, if it's relational conflict, if it's stuff you're dealing with from the past, if whatever it is, you keep in mind, I'm going to live in such a way that gives sight to the blind. It's good news. I'm going to live in such a way that I experience God's freedom and God's release. I'm not going to be discouraged by this because I want to live out God's peace, God's shalom, God's wholeness. I want to let God heal me and make me a better person, even through this experience. I'm not going to retaliate. I'm not going to get dragged down and be discouraged by this. I'm not going to retreat and give up. But I want to be whole. The shield of faith. This is an amazing picture. I'm going to show you the next shot I have is of this is kind of like, you ever seen Spinal Tap? Where they want Stonehenge to come down like on the stage, and it ends up being like the size of a coffee table. Have you seen that? This is like me just digging holes into things that aren't funny to people. That's fine. Go see Spinal Tap later. This is like the Stonehenge version of what happened, the Spinal Tap Stonehenge version of what Roman warfare looked like. Imagine this times like 5,000. And you would have centurions lining up. It was called phalanx formation. They would line up in squares, like so many troops across the front, and then just squares, lines of those troops back forming a square. And they all had this massive shield. And it could be covered in leather. Sometimes they would soak it in leather, and the enemies would shoot arrows at them that were lit on fire, and the arrows could be snuffed out by the water on the shield. But here's what they would do. They would march together, and with the shield down, like the centurion we saw before. And then when they were ready to engage in battle, they would stop. So you've got this line of centurions, and then each line goes as far back as far as the eye can see. They would drop their shield, this 4.5 foot tall shield, like this, and just stop right there. And then the guy behind would put his shield over the top. And it was like this living, moving, armored tank. Just this like almost like scales, like a reptile, just like slithering at you. And they would take a step, and it would go, then drop their shield, it would go, poof, the ground would shake. And then the enemy would shoot the arrows, and they just all hit these shields, and they're all snuffed out. And then all the centurions would pick up their shield at the same time, poof, and the ground shakes again. And they all just clamp down their shield. Do you see this picture? How frightening that would be? The author is saying, not you, individual, take up the shield of faith. The author is saying to even us as a church, all of you together, y'all take up the shield of faith. So it's not just your faith protecting you from discouragement, but it's the faith of the person next to you. Oh, that'll preach. That's good stuff right there. It's the faith of the person next to you, sitting next to you. Sometimes you don't have enough faith to make it through discouragement on your own. Sometimes you need Christian community. Sometimes you need a one group. Sometimes you need family and friends. Have you experienced this? People who will come alongside you, and they'll put up their shield for you and protect you against the fiery darts of the enemy, those arrows of discouragement. The helmet of salvation. Salvation is wholeness, peace. It's very much connected to the other things we talked about. The sword of the Spirit, the Word of God, Scripture. To know what God says about my life, God's truth about my life. You have the power to choose how you respond. God wants to use everything that happens to you in your life to heal you, to make you whole. Nothing happens to you that you can't withstand. That's God's truth. That you hold on to that. And you can choose, with the full armor of God, you can choose how you respond to the discouraging things that happen to you. I want to close with a couple of stories. A person I know in her 50s lost a friend to cancer who was also in her 50s. When something like that happens, it threatens to discourage us, doesn't it? Those are fiery darts. She starts thinking thoughts like, well, she was my age. That could happen to me. And I have children and grandchildren. I'm not ready to leave yet. And you can see how that could discourage somebody. She needs friends and family and a church community with a shield of faith who can believe for her when she's discouraged. So do you. Some of us feel financial pressure that we talked about. We carry anxiety into our families. We have all kinds of questions about this. We need the belt of truth. In Matthew 6, Jesus says, don't worry about all the material things that people in the rat race just run themselves crazy worrying about. Your Heavenly Father knows what you need before you ask Him. Worrying doesn't add a single hour to your life. That's God's truth. And that can protect you from the discouragement of financial anxiety. You would be surprised at the number of men I've talked to over the years who were guys, around retirement, after retirement. You'd be shocked at the number of guys who have told me at that age that they've thought about checking out. That they've questioned whether they have a purpose. And they've maybe they're dealing with a health crisis or some kind of ongoing issue. And they thought about giving up, decided discouragement. They need the shield of faith. They need the full armor of God to protect them from discouragement. There are many of us here in One Church who feel like we're a minority among Christians. And we know that we live in a culture that is polarized, where Jesus gets used for political reasons all the time. And there are many of us here who constantly deal with this temptation to be discouraged, to wonder, hope everything's okay back there, to wonder if, do I really want to be a Christian? Do I want to call myself a follower of Jesus? Yeah, okay, but I still don't want to be a part of what I see in this culture. I don't want to be a part of this religious, political, industrial complex that I see in American society. I don't want to be a part of that. And we face discouragement. We need the full armor to protect us against that discouragement. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, let us not wallow in the valley of despair, but with faith we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. You can move forward. You don't have to be discouraged with the full armor of God. Next week, we're going to celebrate the first anniversary of One Church. And it's been a journey. It's been a journey. It's been a roller coaster in some ways. And I'm watching the clock. I know, we'll get there. It's been a journey in some ways. There have been people who were part of One Church for a while and they left. There were some who left peacefully. There are some who left not so peacefully. There were more people who came. It's been a journey. And when we come up on the first anniversary of One Church, we have an opportunity, and we're going to talk about these things next week, to dream God's dreams. And to ask ourselves, with 1 year, only 1 year behind us, by the way, only 1 year behind us, where can we go from here? What does God, the Spirit, have for the future of this church? And there will be times when we feel the fiery darts of the enemy. And we need to pull up the shield of faith, that we need to put on the full armor of God. I just want to share something with you quickly before we take communion. There's a pastor who's a friend of mine back in the Midwest. Went to seminary together, actually. And when I say there's a pastor and she, you already know there are some battles that she faces, correct? And so she's in this minority of Christians who doesn't want to be a part of the political, religious culture war thing. She's a thoughtful Christian, and she's struggling with discouragement. She faces circumstances that threaten to discourage her from time to time. A Facebook message, and she said, again, this is a pastor, a spiritual leader, that she's been watching the services online. And she and said some really nice things. She said, it seems like you have a church, not me, y'all have a church where people want to authentically follow Jesus and think. And said, it seemed, I love the way she said this. She's like, you want to make believers think and thinkers believe. Isn't that cool? And she said, I know the stances that you've taken as a church body. I can imagine what you've been through. I just wanted to let you know this. And she ended her Facebook message like this. One church gives me hope. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that a privilege to be part of that? 1 year in, and rattling around in an elementary school gym. 1 year in, and here's somebody across the United States say, one church gives me hope. So these followers of Jesus in Ephesus were facing circumstances in life that threatened to discourage them. And they had a choice to make. Would they trust that they've been empowered by God so that they're able to choose how to respond to those things and stand and be strong and make it through the challenge? Or would they be defeated? Would they retreat? Would they give up? That's really the choice that we have. But the author of Ephesians says, because of the Spirit of God working in your life, you do have a choice. And in a moment, we're going to celebrate communion together. And as we do this, of course, communion has the word union in it. It speaks of oneness. As we do this, I want you to think of the things that threaten to discourage you. And as we come forward and someone hands you the bread and you dip the bread into the cup, I want you to kind of look around and realize other people are doing this too. And in a way, it's an illustration that all of us have our shields. And we really do want to be the kind of body where we can help each other put on the full armor of God, and we can pull our shields around each other and give each other the gift of faith and whatever it is that you are facing that discourages you. And maybe in reality, if you're not in a one group, maybe in reality, experiencing that looks like signing up for a one group. Maybe that's what it looks like. If you're serving in a ministry, getting involved and getting close to other people so you can build relationships with them is a way of actually living that out to where they can put their shield around and believe for you and experience Christian community. So